Today we have our closing panel, the Administration of Generosity, the last session of the virtual symposium on inclusive philanthropy for 2022. I'm Dave Moss, and I'm going to moderate what will hopefully be an interesting and informative conversation. I'm pretty sure it will. With Christina, is it Charpentier? Do we do it?
Yes.
I didn't clarify. I assumed it was French.
Yeah, nope, you did a good job.
Here in Maine, it could be like Charpentier.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll Americanize it. She works at a Canadian foundation and gives money away as her job. Pretty cool. A lot of people do that, including our other panelist, Anne Long, who for a while has been the head of the Greater Charitable Foundation in Australia. We don't have to say exactly how long.
Thank you.
Over 5 years. And I myself have been, I've dealt with the administration of generosity. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this panel is because in a few weeks, I will be having report discussions with the proposal authors who have asked us for feedback. And one of the things that I often have to talk to them in those panels is, I'm explaining grant maker behavior to them sometimes for the first time. And often it has to do with the fact that it takes a lot of administrative work to run an organized grant making program. The more you give away, the more time it takes in administration. And it explains a lot of the ways that funders behave. And for fundraisers, if they can learn more about the administration of generosity or the work of professional philanthropists, that will probably help them with their fundraising. And just for anyone out there who's just generally interested in philanthropy, we're getting into it. Hopefully learning about the day-to-day work of professionals on your side of the funding spectrum. Right? In our last session, we focused on some of the day-to-day realities of nonprofit professionals. And hopefully, some funders out there were listening. And now we're going to talk with the two of you. So I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves, because I bet you've both done that before. Let's go in alphabetical order by country, and also by first name. It's the same. Anne from Australia and Christina from Canada. Terrific. Anne, tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks, Dave. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning for me and this evening. It's a great pleasure. So I've actually been in the not-for-profit space, working in this space for, as Dave said, it's a little over 5 years. Closer to 20 years. So I started out as a fundraiser all those years ago and working for a very big homelessness charity here called Mission Australia. And so I got a feel for what it's like to be a grant seeker all those years ago. So I was working on that side for a number of years, and then in 2008 I had the opportunity to move across to a corporate space where I was establishing a corporate foundation. So I moved from grant seeking to grant making, and that was 2008, and I worked there at NIB Health Funds, one of the top 5 health funds in Australia, established their charitable foundation, ran that for a few years, and then moved across here to what was then Greater Building Society, and then in more recent years Greater Bank, and established their foundation. So I've been grant making now for 14 years. Absolutely love the philanthropic sector. I've really enjoyed my time on both sides of the fence, and I think it really does give me quite a unique perspective, having had both experiences.
And I believe, Christina, is similar. You started on the other side as well. Perhaps we should. There's enough division in the world already I don't need to be talking about sides.
Yes. So I started actually my career at a university as an event planner and concert promoter for the students. But one of the events that we used to run was a 2,000 student charity gala that would raise about $30,000 for different charities every year. And we would have the charities submit proposals as to what they would use that money for. And then we would select the ones that we would support each year. That led to my role as an executive director at a small public art gallery that was actually funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And it was an operating grant for 3 years. And I actually went off on maternity leave 2 years into that. And then when my maternity leave was over, there was no job to go back to because the grant had ended. But a job came up with OTF, as we call it. And I've been there for 8 years now.
Well, it was all very Canadian. There was maternity leave and like multi-year funding. And we'll talk more about those things in a minute. But first, I'm going to tell a story quickly, and we can go to the next slide for me to do that. I do remember when I first started working at nonprofits, like there was a lot of talk about storytelling. I had to go to storytelling training, and my father's a historian, and so I thought that they were going to teach us like how to tell, tell history stories, how to tell fairy tales. I don't know. So like how in a way to help fundraising. I know they meant like how to tell your organization, like how to share your organizational narrative. Really, that's what they mean. But history is kind of storytelling as well, and I find that it can be enlightening for a lot of endeavors, including philanthropy. A story that I like to tell and tell often during report discussions is of Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage, who is a great lady. There's a picture of her there. And you can read a lot about her online, including in some of the books we listed in the resources. The Russell Sage Foundation, she named after her husband, is still around giving grants at a pretty major clip and has been around since 1907. This article is from a couple of years before that. He was very much not charitable. It says this is how people wrote news articles back then. There's not a lot of fluff. But like he wanted to be very clear, like please don't send a bunch of like this is not a charitable request, big capital letters like that. That's really the main thing we wanted to get across there. But it was a lot of money. I think if I remember correctly, like $63 million in 1906. And her original foray into philanthropy was basically that she did some interviews in some various papers and said that she wanted to give the money away. People should contact her or send her a letter. She would sometimes even like publish her address in newspaper, including I think the New York Times. And she got like 50,000 letters over 6 months, way too many to read. And like a year later, set up a foundation, program officers, and like an RFP and some very specific narrow parameters for funding, and became one of a few models for like how foundations operate. Russell Sage Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegies were some very early folks. If you dive into the history and read about it, you'll notice they used much different language back then. And the field has come a long way. But I tell this story, right, to point out that like one, if you go out there and say, hey, I'll take like one of the reasons why funders don't just accept any proposal in any format, right, is because if they did that, they would get way too many. Right? Part of their narrowing process is to receive a manageable number of proposals. And any funder who goes out and does that sort of thing will learn pretty quickly. You can do an open proposal process. And we partnered with some large-scale prize competitions and things who have accepted a lot of proposals. And to do that well is to do it very thoughtfully and to understand that there will be a live administration. If you're going to receive something like thousands or tens of thousands of proposals, you probably need hundreds of staff to read through all that and do it and find the best ones in a thoughtful fashion. And even then, right, you'll probably have to skip things like giving feedback to the people on your unfunded list, which is why we are around. So I highly recommend looking up she's got a pretty good Wikipedia article. And there are some by there's like a Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage Society, and honestly, someday they'll make a movie out of her. Maybe David Jaffe. We can think about that someday. It would be pretty cool. Part of why she set up the foundation was out of spite for her husband, which isn't really relevant to our topic today, but like one of the reasons why I like her. Like he really didn't want to give the money to charities. He thought they were begging, right? And generally thought that having money meant you deserved to have it. And she ended up giving most of his money away after he died and named the foundation after him too, which is great. So with that story in mind, we're going to dive into the specifics of some different foundations that probably have much different founding stories. I don't think there are spiteful widows involved with either one, but there oftentimes with family foundations in the U.S. There could be some interesting family drama in the background of the foundation. It is something to consider. However, right, Greater Charitable is a little bit different, and I managed to find a picture on the internet of Anne administering some generosity. Look, she had to lug that. How far did you have to carry that big check?
Yeah, it's a bit awkward, that's for sure. And it gets brought out on special occasions.
So tell us a little bit more about, you told us a little bit about yourself earlier, but Greater Charitable Foundations, you just said it started as Greater Build?
So this company is now called Greater Bank, but it was originally when I came here, Greater Building Society. So it's a mutual, which basically means it's not listed on the stock exchange. So and it's one of those banks that was established many years ago by local people who really just wanted to support each other to get roofs over their heads, really, and be able to borrow some money to get some housing. So that's the history. So a real strong community-based organisation. We would be, as it is now, there's about 260,000 customers, I think, but it's extending geographically, covering a fairly significant portion of the country. But a mid-tier bank in that regard. So when I came here, their idea was they needed to formalise their giving. There was a lot of, fragmented community giving that was happening. And so they wanted to establish a foundation and really formalise things. They weren't sure about the mechanics, so to speak. So I'd come from NIB where I'd ran two different funding rounds. One was a national round that was multi-year funding. The other was a community round that was short burst, smaller amounts of funding for 12-month periods. So I presented that concept to them here. They were not so keen on two different rounds, so they just went with the one annual grant round where we were giving away just over $1 million a year. So we were doing that from 2011 up until the start of last year when we had a strategy review. I'll explain why we had that strategy review if you'd like me to dive into that now, Dave. So we had these huge funding rounds, and the last one in 2019, so just before the pandemic, we received over 220 applications. We shortlisted down to 30. We interviewed 12 and we funded 7.
Okay, go for with numbers. I always have to ask people to repeat. It'll probably be helpful, perhaps for somebody else listening as well. 220 applications received. Did you read 220?
I did.
At the end of that, like how? Because I've read a similar number. Like how easy would it like if I just named one of them, like would you be able to summarize the proposal?
I probably could.
No. It's weird. But then 3 years later, if I were to mention that organization to you, I like for me, like if they haven't applied in several rounds, like boy. It's weird how memory works, right? When you're because that's so many organizations. There's like several people there and all the folks that they serve and everything. And like it was 200 proposals that you had to read. I'm always very interested to hear about that. And thank you for telling me the number. Right? Like I know some some philanthropists like to keep it shrouded. How many they receive and how many, particularly how many they're saying no to, which brings me to the next number. Right? You were saying no to nearly all of them. 190 organizations, right?
Yeah. It was really actually very upsetting. I finally came to the place of this doesn't sit well with me at all. And I was trying to provide feedback to all of these people as well. So it just, it was so exhausting. But I wanted to do the right thing by them. But I just said, truly, I don't feel this structure is serving us or serving our charities
And you changed the way you give grants.
So 2020 pandemic, we just asked our current partners what they needed to get them through, and we just gave them the money they needed to get through. So did what a lot of funders really did during 2020. But the start of last year, we decided, no, this just is not an equitable or a fair process, and it doesn't feel right at all. So we sat down with the board, and as a collective, we decided, well, the directors agreed, so that was good. And we decided that we would shift to invitation only. They also wanted to narrow the focus a bit too, so that we were in closer alignment with the bank and what the bank is all about, I suppose. So there was a greater focus on financial well-being, financial wellness. But also the key was to be invitation only, but also to leave the door open. We were not closing the door. We weren't going to be exclusionist in any way. So we kept saying, and we've still got it on the website, if you believe your project is in alignment with, what we're working towards, please get in contact with us. We're more than happy to speak to you. So while I was going out then and seeking potential partners, I was also saying, please get in touch with me. So I felt that this was kind of the best of both worlds. I was concerned how the NGOs would approach our different structure, and we only had positive responses, and most people saying to me, thank you for not putting us through yet another application process or interview process where we don't stand much of a chance of success. We would much prefer that when you reach out to us, we're really hopeful that we can all work towards a positive outcome.
Terrific. We will talk a little bit more about some of that stuff when we get into the recommendations. But just a sort of a follow-up about you as a professional. Did you always know you wanted to help people, regional Australian companies set up their grant-making programs, like when you were a little girl? Did you know that?
No.
How does one get into this sort of career?
That's a very good question. So I was actually a journalist by trade, so to speak. That was where I started my career. And then I moved across to this role with Mission Australia, which initially was a marketing style. When you're talking about events, Christina, it was a marketing events kind of style where I had fundraisers reporting into me. But then I just became, I just segued into fundraising myself. So because it just became such a huge part of my role. And I loved it. I found that I loved building relationships, building partnerships. That really resonated with me as an individual. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. So building those bonds was something I thrived on. So, and I loved working for the charity I did, this homelessness charity, who were all about breaking the cycle. So that's when I fell in love with the sector, really. And then from there, it was to have the opportunity to be a grant maker and work on the other side was just a gift, really.
Outstanding. We will come back to Anne in a moment as we go over some of our funder recommendations. But for now, we can go to the next slide. We will hear from the Fondation Trillium to Ontario and the catchment that she funds.
We've had some good discussions about that.
Very
So
administration word, right?
yeah, absolutely. Very bureaucratic. So the Ontario Trillium Foundation is actually an agency of the government of Ontario. And we work to support investments in communities in the province. So to explain a few things in that sentence, by agency, so we get our funding from the provincial government, and we're responsible and authorized to perform that, a function as an agency, and are accountable to a particular ministry within the government, the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and to the minister. And then we have an appointed board of directors. So they're like political appointees. And also with the name Trillium, that's our provincial flower. So a lot of branding. If you're ever in the province, you'll see a trillium on different signs and different, parts of governmental signage. So we invest approximately $100 million each year. Since 2015, we've invested $613 million into 3,600 projects. Fund a variety of organizations like legions, curling clubs, soccer organizations, environmental groups, small municipalities under 20,000 people, art galleries like I worked at, theaters, homeless shelters, missions, things along those lines. We have 6 different sectors that we fund. So, as I mentioned, arts and culture, the environment and whatnot. But that's a big part of our funding strategy. So over the last 40 years, we just found this out because we're celebrating our 40th this year. We've granted $2.6 billion in the last 40 years, which is a pretty big number. Our foundation, sorry?
Canadian dollars?
Canadian dollars, yes.
Quite a bit.
Yes, yeah. So our foundation also administers a $15 million fund for another ministry within the government, and that's called the Youth Opportunities Fund. And that provides grants and capacity building to grassroots groups and collaboratives that improve the well-being of families and has a focus on Indigenous and Black communities. But that's a very separate program from the one that I'm in, and mine is like, as I mentioned, within the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. We, in terms of funding streams, since 2015, we did a bit of a refresh on our funding strategy back then. We focused on seed, capital, and grow. So seed projects, one's just getting off the ground. Capital is fairly explanatory. It could be accessible washroom somewhere, or a picnic shelter at a park, or some sort of, it could be the machinery needed for a lawn bowling club. And then grow, which was an evidence-based stream where organizations would provide either their own evidence or evidence from another project to show that what they wanted to do could happen based on that evidence. And it could be upwards of $750,000 over 3 years for those grow grants. But once the pandemic hit, we pivoted to support organizations on COVID recovery. And then in the last year, we actually managed an additional $100 million that was partially operating funding and partially capital, again, specifically related to COVID. So
just you threw that additional in real quick.
Yeah.
You've said additional $100 million, about as nearly as I've ever heard anyone. But I think that's worth that. Like I said, I like to repeat numbers sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
It was very big. $100 million more than you had than normal.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is like
so we've had a big year.
It's double what you normally give away.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a lot of challenges with that. Additional staff that had to be hired to help administer, and a lot of different factors with it.
Yes, but ultimately a good thing.
Absolutely.
I imagine you didn't really ever lose sight of the fact that it's good.
No, because these organizations needed it, and we were more than happy to.
It is very real work for the administrators of the program. Without more staff, that could go very poorly, I would think.
Yes. Yeah. So it creates more assessments. So there's, 3 main functions to my job. And that's outreach, assessment, and monitoring. And so obviously created a lot more assessments that had to be reviewed. And then once those grants were awarded, more monitoring that had to happen that we're still doing right now. All of the one of those $50 million granting rounds has just, all the final reports are just coming in for that. So where normally I would have maybe 1 or 2 final reports to review over a week or two, I have like 8. So it's definitely created some more work in that sense.
How many, do you know how many proposals you read in a year?
So
Not
in a
200,
normal year,
maybe more.
so in a normal round, the round that we just had, we received over 1,300 across the entire province. And my catchment, and I'll get into explaining that. My catchment reviewed, which is, there's 4 program managers within our catchment, and we reviewed over 100 between the 4 of us.
The catchment is like a county of a province.
Yes. So we operate based on a little bit like electoral districts. And so our funding is population based. And in the image that is on the screen, that shows the different catchments within the province. And yes, the catchment is, it identifies the boundaries. And our catchment is the light green one that is...
ones that have people in them?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So as you can see, so this image that's on the screen, the darker the green, the more population that there is. So we are the light green. If you can see where it says New York, we're just a little bit above and to the left of that. And so we border, my particular one is called Durham, Halliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge. So that's 4 different larger municipalities. And we border on Toronto on the west, and then an hour's drive to the east is how far it goes, and then about 2.5 hour drive to the north. And so it covers the suburbs of Toronto, as well as some mid-sized communities of 20,000 to 100,000 people, and then some very significantly rural areas as well. Our catchment allocation is based on population. So we have approximately $7 million per year within our area. And to give some context to our area, our catchment is larger than the state of Connecticut. So it's quite a large space. But if you look at Ontario as a whole, compared to some of the states below, it's fairly large geographically. So.
And that largest catchment there, the northernmost one.
Yes.
As I understand, like there's not really a whole lot of folks living there.
No. So it is definitely largest land mass wise, but definitely one of the smallest in terms of population.
And like, so in one catchment, just like how many proposal readers do you have? Administrators?
Yeah. So that largest one there would have 1. The largest catchment would probably be one person reading. Yeah. And the largest catchment would be Toronto, and I think they have 9. So
Toronto's big city.
Yeah.
Lots of things going on.
Yeah.
Cleaner than American cities.
Yeah, I guess so.
Better managed, largely perhaps because of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. I grew up in Maine, near Canada, and I've always thought Americans could learn a lot from how your country manages itself. Well operated situation you got up there. I'm envious. And I think that's philanthropy. We definitely have a lot to learn from our sisters, right? We all have the same founder, our 3 countries.
Mm-hmm.
And we do philanthropy in largely the same way. Right? The proposals come in, right? They get administrated, hopefully by professionals and properly, right? And then grants go out. That's great, Sarah. They're probably benefiting from Ontario Trillium funded programs there. Thanks to the good work of Christina and her colleagues. All right, so we're going to, we're half an hour in. We'll go into the next slide, which I think is our recommendations. There we go. We came up with these the other session. Our session was called Nonprofit Nuts and Bolts. We focused on day-to-day challenges. And at first, the plan was just to talk about challenges. Then I realized that could seem like a little kind of a gripey session. So we decided to add some recommendations to it. And then I was like, well, we have funders coming later, so we'll have them we'll have them go over them. One thing that came pretty clear is like these are not groundbreaking suggestions. If this is in fact the first time anyone has suggested these things to you, please tell me about that. But probably not. We also acknowledged in the other session that there are some, realities to implementing these, and in fact, and certainly that some of these things might look different for different kinds of funders. But what I'd like to do for the next half of the session is have each of you comment on each of the recommendations, what your thoughts are, what I'm interested in hearing, and I think the audience is interested as well. Your thoughts about them, like as a professional philanthropist, right? And also, what, if anything, your organization, right, does in that regard. And you've mentioned some of these things already. Like I think one of you already mentioned multi-year grants, and we can go a little bit more into. Right, so when we say accept proposals thoughtfully, that can in fact include only inviting proposals, right? And it sounds like you were very thoughtful and deciding to do it that way, right? Doesn't mean everybody has to have an open process and accept all the proposals. That wouldn't be very thoughtful, especially if you were listening when I was telling the story of the widow sage. I try not to call her that. A lot of the books I read were written a while ago. And they keep calling her the widow sage, which is also what she called herself. It's how she referred to herself. I think that was the style of the time. And when we introduced this first recommendation, it was met with some support from our fellow symposiists. And you'll see other folks recommending this too, is that you should give multi-year general operating grants, right? It is difficult to commit to, giving an organization money years in advance, however, right? I know both of you have on occasion given such grants. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the realities from each of you about, right, some of the administrative, and feel free to be boring about it. If you want to tell it, like we just saw the exciting handing a big check to, I think, was that Ronald McDonald House?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the exciting part of philanthropy, right? What are some of the administrative realities of giving multi-year general operating grants? Let's go in reverse alphabetical order this time. Christina.
So as I mentioned before, I was funded by OTF before I started working there. And that was a multi-year general operating grant to hire me. And there was literally an administrator there before, and that was it in terms of staffing. Part of the problems that happen with general operating with smaller organizations, I think, perhaps larger too, is that once that money comes to an end, sometimes everything just falls apart. That there's challenges with getting the money. The idea is for them to be able to raise enough money that they can continue on without that support. The reality is in certain situations, it doesn't happen. Now, in the case of the organization I worked at, some of the groundwork that I put in back 12 years ago, came to fruition for the organization about 4 or 5 years ago. So they now do have additional support from the municipality, as public art galleries do here. So that just took some time. It wasn't something that came about when I was there. So when we did a refresh at OTF in 2015, and that's when we moved into the project grants with the seed capital and grow. Some of the organizations that got seed funding then moved into grow funding, and part of that does include an overhead and administration line where they can get funds for executive director to oversee the work, some of the costs to run the organization. I do hear a lot from organizations about how helpful operating grants are, and when the one we administered last year came at a very crucial time for a lot of organizations. So I definitely see the benefit to it, but I also see the benefit to the project funding. So it's, that balance.
Anne, general operating grants.
The majority of mine, Christina, have been multi-year programmatic grants, definitely. So with expiration date, and whilst you're hoping through the 3-year period that sustainability, because you're always talking about sustainability, but it's very difficult for the NGOs to secure further funding, even though they might be trying, and, you know, sustainability just may not be an option for them. So it certainly is a hard element, the difficult element, I suppose, of programmatic support. I did provide general operating support, obviously through COVID times, and look, what felt so good about that too, it felt a little bit old-fashioned, really, that you were just saying, what do you need? Great, okay, here you go, and you don't actually have to report back to me on it. And it was quite joyful. I quite enjoyed it, and certainly the NGOs themselves were. It was just such a freeing kind of feeling to be able to go, great, okay, well, thank you. It'll keep the lights on, you know, it keeps the doors open, and we will report to you though. Anyway, we certainly will. And they freely did, but there was no, you know, there was no requirement for them to do so. But in a sense, I kind of enjoy those grants more, because yes, it feels as if I love just giving that, because it says this power imbalance built business. We do feel like we're giving all of that power and control completely back to the charity to say, this is what I need this money for, this is what I'm going to do with it, and thank you. Just thank you for handing it over kind of freely. I know that sounds old-fashioned, but it was kind of, I felt it was great. I really enjoyed that process.
Well, you wouldn't have been able to, certainly you can't just every year be like, well, what do you need? Here's the money.
No, absolutely not. And not for everyone. But certainly coming into this invitation only process, what we have noticed, Dave, is that we can, as part of that, say, now, what is it precisely you do need, you would like, what's going to help you get there, what's going to help you achieve those outcomes? Okay, great. Then let's build this out to look like what you need, and let's build out that budget around what your requirements are overall.
So on our next recommendation here, we went back and forth on what we were going to write specifically, and accept proposals thoughtfully is not very specific. But like fundamentally what we mean is that these organizations would like the opportunity to propose their ideas to you, and they should have some kind of process. I like invitation only, and also you can't contact us. That's not very good. Yours is invitation only, but there is a way for them to find out if they can be, and if it's a good fit, then they can be invited. And if not, then they don't waste their time writing one of the 190 proposals that you knew you were going to reject, right? And I personally, I think that's sounds like the right decision moving forward. And you still get to have those conversations with people in the community. A lot of the proposals we review here at Unfunded List are from very well marketed philanthropy programs, right? Which sort of makes it, these are people trying to write their first proposal. They went to Google and were like, where can I write grant proposal program, right? And they found, right, really well marketed things, big corporate stuff, or like challenges, prizes, and things. And then I end up talking to them, right, about the like you applied to something that anybody could find on Google, right? Which meant a lot of proposals. Anybody that's like marketing the RFP, like putting a lot of money into it, like that's something you should think about, because again, that's sort of the opposite of the fundamental problem that Margaret Olivia faced, right? Her initial foray into philanthropy, immediately it was too many proposals. So why then, like, would you see an organization going out and saying, like, we're scouring the globe for every last proposal, right? We want to hear all the solutions, all the potential solutions, right? That's, to me, you're not being particularly thoughtful there, right? You narrow down your region into catchments, put the appropriate like number of people, think about it like demographically and like responsively to the right issues, right? And accept proposals on like only on those topics. Very, very, sounds like a thoughtful process, and continue to be thoughtful about that, right? Or you move from accepting too many proposals into invitation only.
We have a specific application process where the applicants need to address community need. We have a question on diversity, and if their organization is focused, its mission or its programming helps people, it could be gender, it could be race, it could be abilities, that sort of thing. We have a question that is on their strategy of how they're going to achieve a set of outcomes. So we have several different outcomes that are fairly broad for them to choose from. And then we have a budget, a financial workbook where they indicate, broadly and specifically how they are going to spend it. So it could be, is it on staffing? Is it on supplies or on equipment, or is it on overhead and administration? And then they provide us details within that.
Both of you are accepting proposals thoughtfully. It's one of the reasons that I asked you to be here today. I think this is something else that comes up in the report discussions. Managing relationships and also expectations, right? No, you're not fit. You can't apply to this. Is part of relationship management. And certainly the work of a professional philanthropist is not just to read on a computer screen. Hopefully you're right. And certainly the original Flynn, like Margaret was meeting with a lot of her original grantees. Another reason for the accept proposals thoughtfully thing is we don't want to live in a world where only the best marketed programs receive all the funding. I think pretty much everyone agrees that just because we should find some sort of way to get these things in there. Accepting proposals, reading them, right? And that process is important. Knowing who they are so you can have that conversation, right? During the, what do you need? How can I fund it, right? But also you can't manage a personal relationship with everybody who wants money, because that's everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you handle relationship management when you're literally giving money away? I imagine lots of people want to have a relationship with you.
Yeah. And look, I suppose now that I am invitation only, I'm not receiving the volume of requests that I did, but I'm still, I am still working my way through quite a few requests. And I think in terms of managing expectations, it's just being really clear about what we're looking for, and then understanding what the NGO is focused on as well. So it's coming down to having really honest and authentic conversations so that, both sides are very clear on what's required and what someone can bring to the table, and then how we might be able to make it work. So yeah, I think it's really down to honesty, transparency. So they're the two keys for me in terms of managing those relationships and expectations. I'm sure you'd feel the same, Christina.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of, conversations I've had with Dave that I think he found interesting about our organization is that we do decline coaching. So similar to what the Unfunded list does. As a part of our role as program managers, we actually speak with organizations that have been declined and provide them notes on how they might improve, or if there's some sort of roadblock that's preventing them from qualifying to the organization to apply for funding. So, and a part of my role as well is doing outreach. We run information sessions. And then we also are just available if anybody needs to call. And so all those conversations that happen, we try and help manage the expectations with the organizations. We also track our demand rate across our catchments. We don't tend to, promote that as much, but, some catchments may have a demand of $8 for every $1 that they can fund. Some catchments are a little bit lower depending on the round and that sort of thing. So we kind of keep an eye on that as well.
So I don't think I've ever heard of anyone doing that. So you keep very specific track of like how much they've asked for.
We have a significant amount of data actually. We look at, because of the way our catchments are set up, we have all sorts of
At work, do you say catchment this month, or is this for my benefit?
No, I say it a certain way for you. No, we talk about catchments all the time. Sub catchments would be like the smaller municipalities. But yeah, we track like the statistics, the census data. Just this past week, we had a meeting where we were looking at the data of organizations, like specific populations. So Black-led, Black serving, 2S LGBTQ+, women and girls. Like we drill down on all of that data. It's all available to us, so we can see where organizations might be falling off the, through the process. So we just had a session this past week focused on Indigenous and Black-led and Black serving and other BIPOC organizations to try and help them get through the organizational eligibility stage of our process.
That's cool. Wonderful, Christina. I love the sound of that, and the data that you have.
We actually have a whole department. We have a whole department that focuses on measurement and evaluation.
That stuff you share. That stuff in particular is something that I think other funders would be. Imagine you share that with other funders.
Yeah. I mean, that's not part of my role, but I know that those people are involved in conversations with other funders. So
yeah, that's up there to you, but we'll probably have a whole other conversation about that sort of thing. For funders in the audience looking for interesting ways they can help out. One of the bad practices I've seen is to sort of funders will make their grantees report this data without putting the time into doing it themselves. Right? If you want the data, you should have your own department that puts it together. Right? You're the pile of money. Right? It sounds like you've done that. That all sounds very interesting. I'll have to look into some of that stuff. I want to, not to be a wet blanket, right? But just want to drill down on some of the administrative. It's very nice to say manage relationships with your grantees, right? But there are administrative. It takes time. That takes time. You don't have all day to talk to people about how much money they need. Right. So you've got 30 grantees, at least, Anne, right? If you were to talk, do you meet with one of them a day? And that's the end of the month, and then you start over?
No, we have regular conversations. Yeah, I mean, weekly, definitely, with all of the partners. So I actually have two reports per year. More formalized reports, but they can present the information in the best way they see fit. And then I have teleconference kind of check-ins, and they are, structured, but then I'm talking to the partners a lot all the time because we do a lot of volunteering with our partners. So we're discussing those elements with them. They might call me and talk about a problem or an issue. So we'll be discussing working ways through how we can resolve that. We might be working on some media and helping them out with some media. So there's constant involvement. I suppose it is absolutely a real partnership and relationship, and we are in regular contact, but it doesn't seem burdensome in any way. I don't think for either party. It is just really something.
There's a lot of time that goes into just to scheduling that many meetings.
There is,
right?
yeah.
Do you have someone who schedules for you? Do you manage your own?
Yes. Well, we've got it's just the two of us that work in the foundation, but so the lady who works with me is just an expert in comms and corporate volunteering and board admin, and so she supports me in all of those other ways as well. So we cut across a lot of ground together.
I imagine you keep busy. So there's 9 folks just in the Toronto catchment.
and like you, Anne, we do the same thing where it's twice a year. So we do check-ins at the 6-month mark, or before, depending on the grant, before we issue a payment with them. And those are, if it's the halfway mark, then we would have a phone call. Just in the last few months, we've just set up that online function where I just send a link to people, and connected to my calendar, and they can just book with me. And that is the best thing ever. Saves so much time with the back and forth of, are you available? Here's the days and times you're available. And then we have our final reports. But our grantees are available to, we're available to them at any time if they have any issues or questions, or if they need to reallocate some money into something, then we set up times to talk. And so, I, up until 2 weeks ago, when all of those final reports started coming in from that one fund I was talking about, I had about 53 grantees that I was managing. I think I'm getting down into the low 40s now with all the final reports that have just been coming in. So.
And those are lucky grantees. They're lucky to have you as their program manager. All right, so this next we're going to talk engage in advocacy. It's another thing I think sometimes funders, some funders anyway, can be very hesitant to do, and sometimes there can be like legal or other reasons why, or it's just fundamentally not their role. The theme of the symposium, and in fact, Unfunded's motto is listen, learn, speak. Right, and funders have like big, loud voices when they speak. And so we do think if you're funding an issue, then you must care about it in some way, and hopefully you care about it enough to like find some way to speak about it. And that can be the specific issue you're funding, but also philanthropy in general, right? We were in some of the other sessions we've talked about how like tax law and other laws, right, are basically how like the funds, right, your Ontario Trillium Foundation there is set up from like it's the government. I assume a law got passed saying we're going to create this thing, right? It's a democracy up there. People elected those officials that did it in the first place. America we have similar funding agencies. We do with like NIH, for instance, which is the world's largest, and set up largely the same way. We could have more, right? We could, right? And we could also overhaul our tax laws. When we overhaul the way giving goes, though, it is generally in response to like what funders are asking for. That's one area where I do think it'd be very good for more funders to speak up, right? And there are some good organizations in America, the Council on Foundations and independent sector and some others, right, that do like that have lobbying days that will, right, get you the access you need to like, use your loud funder voice and make change in that way. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, right, the like I said, the talking about your grants is a form of philanthropy. God, someone said that to me when I was younger. I was at a fundraising conference, and someone said like talking about your giving is a form of giving. I've thought about it a lot since. I wish I could remember who said that. But I think it's true, right? Especially if you're at a big foundation, other people like to give to the same thing. Obviously, and you, right? And a form of advocacy is to like blowing that check up nice and big, right? And having the media event, that's part of it, right? You're letting people know about the good work of the organization. Using and like that big check size, it's always very interesting. It's a winner. People like seeing those. There's some it's fraught, right? You don't want to offend anybody with your radical positions either. So what do you think about engaging in advocacy, Dan? Especially with corporate folks that want to be careful about that.
That's very true. And working for a bank too, probably even more careful. But what I find is you're right that in terms of gentle advocacy, I suppose we could describe it as, is the media work that we do. So we really do focus on promoting the funded projects and the organisations and their work. So we will aim to do that through all of our social channels and at multiple touch points through the grant period. So in that respect, I would say we are advocating for the orgs themselves, but also for the causes that they are championing. In terms of political advocacy, and because of course in America it works at different, lobbying of various.
It's fundamentally the same though. You can't support candidates Philanthropy doesn't support candidates. That's just
Yeah,
fundamentally a different kind of giving.
yeah.
And there
And
are administrators of those, like with super PACs and things, and they have administrators and who do actually very similar work to you, but they're considering candidates and giving, and the rules and laws and regulations are all very different. Fundamentally, this all works the same, different countries.
yeah,
But yeah,
yes.
so we are specifically focused on like grants to organizations, right? And certainly, and when I say engage in advocacy, we definitely don't. You shouldn't give gifts to politicians. Right? Hopefully you don't do that.
Absolutely not. And we had an example actually in Australia last year. I won't name the charity, but the CEO was in an advertising campaign that was leading up to our election. And in this campaign, she was quoted as thanking the sitting member for the wonderful work that they had done to support their organisation in recent years. And of course, that went against all of legislation and our regulations, and was a really interesting one that just highlighted that fine line, which I'm sure, Christina, you would understand too, that there's that really fine line and everyone has to be quite careful. But so for us, I think the media work that we do is really the strongest form of advocacy from our end.
Yeah, and it's a very fine line for us too, with our funder being the government, and obviously the government can change. And so with each change in government comes different priorities, and we have to walk that. We're very similar with the media and advocacy in that way. Each of our grants, part of the contract is that they need to recognize the foundation and as such the government, and the local representatives to the provincial government go to those recognition events and are the ones that get to hold the check, if you will. And they do a media release as well as other different forms of recognition, so that highlights the work of each of the projects. So,
and I imagine some of that, hopefully, some of the data that gets collected from that department and ends up going back to the government or whoever decides your allotment, and feeds it back into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just even the COVID information, as we're doing the check-ins with our grantees, we're asking them like, what impacts are you still having from COVID, and what percentage is your organization still operating at? When they applied, they put in a certain amount, say 30%, and then at the final report and during the check-ins, where are you at? So we can see if they're still going up and what impacts they're still having. A lot of organizations, while there's no lockdowns anymore or mandatory closures, they're still having issues generating revenue, and in particular having issues with volunteers coming back, and that's one of the biggest problems we're seeing right now.
That's very true. Something else that we do when we make a media announcement of a new partnership, we'll also send all of that information to the sitting members around the country so that they are made specifically aware of what we are funding and the project and the work the charity is doing. So just to help highlight, and occasionally that will then be spoken and mentioned in Parliament by one of those sitting members. So yeah, that's kind of another way of getting that.
That's definitely very helpful. As you said, there are some specific reasons why it would be prudent for your organizations to go down and yell at senators or vocally support candidates or whatever. But there's lots of different kinds of funders. I mentioned a family foundation that's not connected to a company still in existence, and not dependent on a government allotment, would be a lot more free to make their voice be known on certain issues, and they should do that. Their voice will be heard on these things, and if they want to help on how to do that, get in touch with me. I know some people that can help. The last one is somewhat nuanced, and it's connected to, these were all sort of somewhat connected to one of the challenges we discussed. And this one here is, so for my whole career, we've been talking about metrics and impact, and right, and showing your impact, right, and having right certain numbers, and lots of the proposals we read here and in the fund lists are about that. And I hear from funders, one thing I've heard for a long time, right? I don't want to just fund Band-Aids, right? I don't want. I'm just going to be real cliched here. I don't want to fund soup kitchens, right? I want to solve homelessness, right? However, like there are millions of people who need dinner tonight at the soup kitchen until we solve it, right? And so, yes, it's great that you really want these interventions and everything. There are a lot of people that those soup kitchens do need funding, right? We can't interventions can get in the way of just right providing basic needs. And in general, we feel the reason we make this recommendation is right. Those folks that are running that organizations that made that choice, they are probably the best ones to decide like how to explain what their impact is. So we think it's
hard
fine.
though. It's hard. A lot of them have a real challenge with communicating that, and
Yes.
our community need in our application is a great example where sometimes you just still don't understand. And one of the recommendations that I always try and make when coaching applicants is to try and, you were talking about how you like numbers, quantifying it. So, how many people are impacted? How far away are you from the next closest service? How, give those numbers to help give context to the need.
Yes. I will say one of the reasons I started my fundraising career raising money for schools and education. And I straight up burned out of that. And one of the reasons why was around the numbers that education funders in the US asked for, right? Every single funder at that place wanted a different set of impact metrics, right? It was like literacy rates, some places, right? We would get funding from anywhere, wherever we applied, right? Whether they were about raising literacy rates or raising high school graduation rates, right? And sometimes raising like the literacy rates of like 7th graders versus high school graduation rates, or even graduates getting jobs 10 years after graduation. Collecting those three, we were reporting all three sets of those data to different funders, right? In some cases, we would just start like collecting all new data because we found a new funder and that's the new number that they wanted, right? And very rarely did we get to like tell the specific stories of the very specific impact we were having. And I just like, also I looked around me and I saw a lot of very talented fundraisers doing a good job raising money for schools. And I said, I'm going to go. I'll go work on something else. But I couldn't keep up. I really didn't want to keep like jumping through weird metrics, particularly in education. I think that happens a lot. And also here at Unfunded List, right? We give feedback to everybody. Like, I think if you write a grant proposal, you deserve some independent feedback. Right. And we've reviewed almost 850 proposals. That's the number I like to talk about. There's a lot more proposals out there. I want to review a lot more of them. And you're right. It's hard because you need money. So sometimes we see this in the proposals we read, people chasing the metrics that the funders are asking for. They're not necessarily going to push back and say, no, I need to tell my story my way, right? Because you're the one dangling the money in front of them. Right. So I think, and there's lots of ways to do this. Give them space with the questions you ask, right? And like I think you can say, please quantify your impact, right? In some way, give me some kind of number.
Well, we're very prescribed in how we do ours because not only are program managers, one program manager is assessing an application. We have volunteers. That is another component of our job is volunteer management, because the way that we're set up, each catchment has a certain number of volunteers that are appointed through the government, and those people also have to score, and they're lay people, not in this realm, not in this sector. And so we have a rubric set up for our scoring. And so that's everybody can follow the same method for doing it. So we're very specific in that way, just to try and make things easier and down the road.
They're appointed by the government.
Yes.
So it's like a big honor, right?
Yes.
You get this ceremony probably and maybe a certificate.
No. No ceremony. I mean, after a certain number of years of volunteering, they would. No, once they're appointed, then
Who's it? Is
starts
it like the prime
training.
minister that appoints? Who appoints them?
No, so it would be, recommended by our local members of government. People can apply to. There's an actual ministry within the government called the Public Appointments Secretariat for. I think there's 170 different agencies run by the government, like OTF, and so people can apply to the different agencies to be a part of the board of directors or the volunteers or whatnot. And so we have 25 volunteers within our catchment. Some have, a smaller number depending. And then we have to train all of them and maintain those relationships as well. So they're the ones that get to go out and do the check presentations instead of the staff.
So I guess I'd like to see if we have any questions from folks in a moment. But on this, I think it's easy enough to say like trust nonprofits to tell their own story, right? But like you have to like the bank wants to see certain things, right? And like the government of Canada and Ontario the government of Ontario, right, wants to see certain things, right? So you have to report hopefully what they were expecting, right? You definitely, you can't just let them write whatever they want. Trust, I know from experience that when you do that, they'll write a lot. It won't necessarily be very useful, right? So I do think you need to do there's another side to this, right? So how do talk to me about the balance here, right, between trusting them and also being able to do your jobs effectively and see the progress you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a very good point because I like to work individually with each of the partners around developing their contract milestones and what it looks like specifically for them. So yes, while I'm after certain outcomes, I suppose, but I'm very clear that it's got to be what's meaningful to them, because I think this is one of the problems that, funders are sitting back going, well, they need to tick this box and this box and this box and this milestone and this milestone. And I want to make them all neat and all tidy so that when I'm reporting back, there's this complete consistency. But we know it doesn't work perfectly like that, and we know the sector's been grappling with that forever. So I feel with each of the partners develop what is meaningful for them, I will report it back through, and still it is meeting, I believe, my needs of I suppose just what the board's expecting, what their expectations are. So it's managing my board's expectations around what information to receive as well. So, and that's an education process, but I'm getting there because I just feel it can't be that we are placing these artificial, outcome measures on the NGOs and it's trying to put a square peg into a round hole. That's not right. They've got to be able to report for what is meaningful for them, and then I need to be able to extract that for my board, and it's still meeting our needs as well. And it can. So.
Ours is a combination. Like our final report has the metrics, but also has a little bit more of the story of the impact of the funds. And then when we meet with our volunteers and they make the funding decisions, each round we bring in a past grantee to report and tell more of the story. So our last round, it was a small hamlet, I think of about 500 people, and we provided money for lights for the baseball diamond, which in the wintertime became an outdoor skating rink. And so they talked about the impact that had on the kids in the community, and that it's a half-hour drive to the nearest arena. So our volunteers like hearing those stories, and then that works its way up to the government as well.
Our little league field here in Maine also is the ice rink in the winter. That's a very Canadian story, I think. Very, very good. Do we have any questions? I have a couple of questions I want to ask the panelists, but if we have any from the audience, feel free to. And this, like in the other session, I forgot to actually put the contact info there, but we will send it out in a post follow-up thing. Dave, if you want to update it, or ladies, if you want to share in the chat. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it into the chat. But for now, there's one more I wanted to ask. As I was doing the research on your organizations, looked over both of your grantee pools, and then also I've tried to find, and I do this much research for everybody I talk to. So. I tried to find like similar American funders, right? Comparable size and also comparable setup, right? And then like tried to compare the grantee pools. And like, so with OTF, the one thing that shot right out at me was like, no, you don't fund any like local health organizations or health clinics, or which was like a substantial portion of the funding from the American counterpart I was looking at. And in fact, like the number one thing American philanthropy had to fund. And my first thought was like, oh, they hate health.
No, we call it the niche sector. So municipalities, universities, schools, and healthcare are a part of our MOU. We don't fund those.
But also, it's there's much less need for you to do so because I think people can get free healthcare.
Yes,
in your country.
Yeah,
American funder, if they're being responsible, they really have to have a large portfolio of health organizations they're funding. That's not really like that would be there's a choice that like a lot of Americans really aren't free to make. Our funders really aren't free to make. It would seem pretty like because there's going to be a huge need for health services in their community, no matter where they live in America. And so on a similar topic, when I was looking over and I was comparing to some local bank funding organizations, and there's actually a decent number of local banks, they fund based on like what parents are really worried about. One of the things a lot of parents are really worried about is gun safety in schools. And we do have a lot of philanthropy going in that direction, which is, I think, unfortunate. I don't think that's something that philanthropy should have to address. Australia, as I understand, has done a little bit better about that because the legislation moved. And I think one of the effects we don't think about there can seem like a weird point to make, but I think about it a lot. Philanthropy has to take up these issues when government doesn't do anything about them. There are a lot of issues that the American government hasn't done anything about my entire life. Right? And philanthropy has tried and has made some poor forays to solve some of these things just because the need's so great and they really want to. And these days, I think you do have some funders who are befuddled with a large number of requests, just like, Margaret Olivia Slocum's stage was when she first went into it. And narrowing it down seems, maybe cruel in some way. Anyway, I wanted to share that about looking at your organizations. I'm envious of your countries. One of the things I was talking about earlier, like when you work at a nonprofit with very few resources, I sort of sometimes you're always thinking about where the grass is greener. It's one of the reasons why we change jobs a lot. And I do. If I were to work at a funder, I think I'd want to work at a Canadian or an Australian funder. If they're anything, I assume you guys aren't large outliers. I'm not inviting you to like trash on America, but I would like to hear your perspective, right? As you are local funders from other countries, but obviously, like American philanthropy, you probably see some of it in the news, and some of it may affect. You maybe have some co-grantees with some of our foundations. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on Americans and their current approach to philanthropy?
Wow, that's a big question, isn't it? So I suppose because we're such a small country, let's say, we've got 27 million, I think, compared to you've got 330 million in the US.
More than that.
Give or take a million or two. We are so tiny in
I don't know them all.
I mean, we look to American philanthropy for guidance, I think, in some ways, because, with the rich and deep history of philanthropy that you have and the significant funders that you have on your shores there, I mean, the biggest funder we have in Australia is Ramsay, and I think they're in the order of about 3 to 4 billion. But you have so many funders that eclipse what we have. So we do look to you, I think, for some progressive thought on, so where there's discussion around diversity and equity and Indigenous causes and support for minority groups that are voiceless. I think we do look, I know I do look to a number of your big foundations and those very outspoken people for their thoughts around this. I think, that I feel sad though when you say philanthropy is supporting gun control and gun issue. That's sad, because to me that should be a whole of government response from my perspective. It should.
Thank you for agreeing there.
Yeah.
We read, those are some of the sad, we've received several proposals here from folks who are trying to raise money on that. And a lot of money goes to it. Another one is illegal immigration. The biggest online fundraising day ever was that day when there were pictures of kids in cages, and there wasn't anything philanthropy could do about those kids. Those kids were being held by men with guns, agents of the government. That was something for the government to do. And also, we do have the founder of GoFundMe has spoken about it all. He hates how his platform is used. It's almost entirely to raise money for the personal medical expenses of America. And that those stories are sad on their own, but I like to look to your, like you say, you hear it all the time. You look, America is a beacon, right? But I do think we can learn a lot from from looking abroad, especially on some of these issues, like you said, like we are colonized nations with indigenous populations. So there's a lot of these issues are the same. I don't think America can say we've figured all that stuff out. Or that we're doing that particularly well, or that we're doing any of that particularly well. That stuff's very, very hard. And philanthropy is only about 120 years old. And that stuff we never really we didn't spend a whole lot of time on it in the first 100 years. But I mean, I do believe a lot can happen there. This has been a great day, a great series of conversations. I will let our panelists have some closing conversations, have some closing remarks. The real thing we wanted to do today with this panel is give people a glimpse into the day-to-day work of what it's like to give away grants. So maybe in your closing comments, talk to us about because you're there all day. You're at the office all day, giving money away, 9 to 5.
And do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Christina, why don't you go first? What is it? Yeah, what's it like?
Sure.
Like being a professional grant maker?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll think back to Thursday, I guess, is because I referenced it already. Just in terms of our regional team, which is made up of 3 catchments, we met to kind of go over, do an internal debrief of our last funding round. And then we also did the data dive that I was speaking about earlier. I had a decline coaching call with a current grantee, but someone who they had been declined in a previous round as well, and they were looking for some feedback as we move into another funding round. I reviewed a final report from a grantee and checked in with a volunteer about how they were feeling about the most recent round of scoring that they did, and answer some questions about reallocation with a grantee. So that's kind of how I spend my days.
That was one day.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the day in the life of,
And Thursday was Friday for you or something. I can't. I'm not going to figure it out at all. But what do you? I guess you've got a whole day ahead of you today.
I do. Yeah, but we joke if we were lawyers and we had to write down, how lawyers will have 15-minute blocks of what they're spending their time on. We started trying to do that. We just gave up. as you're jumping around from, as you say, Christina, from one thing to another, it might be a legal matter, it might be you're getting some public liability organised with a partner, you're organising a corporate volunteering event, you're checking off on a media release. We actually had an event with one of our partners just on Saturday night here at the local soccer game, and I hosted a box for a whole lot of clients from the charity. And it was really heartening. These kids are from an autism spectrum charity, and one of the boys came up to me and said that was the best day of my life. And I thought, oh. So then, the work that you do, that's just kind of the ultimate, isn't it, really, as a grant maker? Very special.
Yeah, I had one of those days. Actually, the declined applicant. I'd had a check-in with her earlier in the week with regards to how her grant was going, and she was telling me about how much progress that they had made with what really, at the end of the day, a fairly small amount of money, and how they springboarded that into major things for their organization. And it was just so heartwarming to know that that's had that impact, that they've been able to just, in leaps and bounds with just something so small with a project, what they've been able to do.
Yeah, those level conversations are exciting, Christina, aren't they? When, from a small grant, they've managed to secure millions in funding, and that's happened with us a few times. That's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our earlier panelists as well. Thank you, Peter. David Jaffe, great job recording everything. We will be able to share this for everyone's benefits. Particularly, I like I said, that when I'm talking through a lot of these issues with first-time proposal authors, I often reference these videos and panels and some of the podcasts I've done. So I think this one will be very helpful for a lot of them to really understand. You would be surprised how many of them sort of fail to consider that there will be many other proposals, right? That you just sit there and wait, hoping a proposal will come in. Right, and then you judge it solely and individually, right, alone on its merits, and if it's good, then you give it the grant. Right, it would be great if it worked that way, but it is, in fact, right. It sounds like very busy days, full of a bunch of calls. I hope you don't ever do more than one decline call a day. That sounds like it would be.
Depends on the day, but no, generally they get an email with the broad reasons for a decline. And we invite them to call in, and we do want them to call in. We really strongly encourage it, because there's so much more than we can say to them that isn't covered in the email.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. We will now take a short break. I'm going to be here at 7:30 because we promised a Q&A for evaluators from this round. If you're an evaluator this round, I assume you've already done your reviews, and thank you. If you haven't, there's plenty of time. If you happen to be an Australian funder, we do have an Australian organization that has submitted a proposal this round. I think they do different kinds of work than what you fund, but I'm sure your perspective will be useful for them. And rarely do I've had Australian organizations for you before, but not as many as we'd like. Sometimes I'm able to really it's really cool. We get, because when he came in, I remember when he sent me the proposal in the first place, it was like, I'm sure you don't have any Australian funders on your committee. I think that's what he said. And I'm like, well, on my founding board is Anne Long. And he was like, oh, okay. And then he submitted the proposal. So
that's good.
That's and that's actually happened like a bunch of times. Like, I'm sure you don't have any evaluators who have familiarity with this, right? And I, in fact, I have 9 people who work there. Right? We have a lot of folks reviewing proposals with us, and a lot of them are professional grant makers, which again is really cool. It's a lot of the folks that review with us have the same profession and consider this like a nice professional development learning community to be a part of. Hopefully you agree, and you've now participated in the body of knowledge that we have, that we present to the public. Christina, you are on the steering committee for the We Give Summit.
I was last year.
last year.
Yes, I had to take a step back because I have some other things I'm working on.
This session actually, I remember I submitted a similar version of it to do last year, and we didn't get to go, and I actually rewrote it for this. I am very enthused by lots of movements to try to like get more people giving. Right? There was Giving Tuesday, right? In the We Give Summit. There's lots of other things to try to get people more involved and thoughtful about it. I do think that's great. Once those people sign up, I think they're going to want to hear, like, they're going to want to continue to be thoughtful because like they have signed up for an administrative enterprise. Like you're going to be after you have a lot of reading to, you have a lot of homework to do now. Like, yes, it'll be inspiring and you'll have those cool moments, the cool big check moments, right? But you're gonna have to, there's decline calls and lots of other stuff that goes along with the work as well. Thanks for coming and sharing. I'm gonna take a quick break. Like I said, we're doing just a general Q&A for last week of questions. The rest of you can get back to your reviews. I'm Dave at unfundedlist.com. If anyone wants to send me an email, questions or comments about this. Thanks again, David Jaffe, for the recording. I think we can probably stop recording. Hopefully we have.